Welcome back to the world according to Briggs and another rant. Today we're doing Oregon. If this is your first time here at one of our rant videos, I get people asking me all the time to tell them about a place with no stats, just what's the story on this place? And that's what these rants are all about. Today we're talking about Oregon, my current home state. Grew up in Southern California, now live in Oregon. And, it's a great place to live, but it's got a bunch of problems. So today, we're giving you the story on Oregon. No fluff, no stats, no BS, just the straight stuff. Got it? Let's take a look.
Briggs warned his friends and neighbors about moving to Oregon's rain. Endless gray skies, never-ending showers, gloomy days, no sunny refrain. He told tales of rainy mornings, wet boots, cold coffee, and tears. The streets like rivers, the air so dense, a downpour that leaves you weary.
So you're thinking about moving to Oregon. Oh boy, pull up a chair because you need a kind of intervention usually reserved for people who think buying a timeshare in Florida is a sound financial decision. Oregon sells itself like some magical land of pine trees, coffee, and laid-back bearded folks on bicycles. But in reality, it's more like someone took a Pacific Northwest postcard, dunked it in a bucket of depression, and sprinkled a layer of government-approved misery. Let me give you the grand tour of why Oregon is basically a long, damp, cautionary tale. First, let's talk about the weather, because that's what everyone always brings up, so we'll just get it out of the way. And it's also going to dominate your existence if you move to Oregon. Western Oregon doesn't really have seasons so much as it has rain, and slightly less rain, and then 2 months of dryness and heat. You'll start to forget what the sun actually looks like. People come from Arizona to visit and just assume the apocalypse has already happened. Your socks will never be dry again, especially if you live on the western side of the state. You'll spend 7 months out of the year debating whether you should invest in waterproof mascara, give up on makeup, or just embrace the goth raccoon look. The state bird should be mildew. And you know what happens when you live under a ceiling of gray clouds for most of the year? Seasonal depression becomes the official pastime. The state doesn't produce a lot of Olympic athletes. We've had a few, but not many. We produce people that own light therapy lamps and spend February wearing VR headsets with a tropical beach running on a loop. You don't tan in Oregon, you oxidize. And you know what the real kicker is? You don't even get a discount for all that gloom and gray skies. That's kind of the trade-off. If you live in a place with bad weather, you're supposed to get a discount on your housing, your cost of living. Everything's supposed to be cheaper because nobody really wants to live in a place that's got horrible weather. We don't get 5 feet of snow in most of Oregon. Yeah, I mean, up in the mountains you do. But, we're not like as bad as Minnesota, but it just rains constantly, so you expect there should be some kind of a discount. There used to be a discount, then rain jackets were invented, and the rain didn't bother people as much anymore. I mean, that's half the reason people move down to California and live there is because the weather is great and they kind of tolerate the high cost of living and high housing prices. Portland's cost of living is climbing like it's trying to summit Mount Hood in the latest Nike hiking boots. Back in the day, Portland was marketed as an affordable hipster wonderland. Cheap rent, weird food trucks, and mustaches that were last worn in bulk back during the Great Depression. Now in Portland, you'll need a full-time job and 3 side hustles to rent a studio apartment downtown. Groceries cost so much that you'll start side-eyeing the nutria to see if they're actually edible. You don't know what a nutria is? Look it up. And if you thought you'd save money because Oregon doesn't have sales tax, you're adorable. That is so cute. Sure, you won't pay extra for that $100 lap dance, but your income and your property taxes will mug you harder than a pickpocket sumo wrestler with anger issues. You're not saving money, you're just getting shaken down by a guy in a different uniform. Oregon is one of the most taxed states, and unlike other states that are cutting taxes, Oregon just added more. Meanwhile, Portland's got a homeless crisis. It has gotten better since it peaked in 2022, but it's still far worse than 99% of US cities. We got tent cities everywhere, under bridges, in parks, on sidewalks, in vacant buildings, and down by the river. You'll step out for brunch and realize your favorite cafe patio now has a homeless food critic 2 feet away. While placing your order, you hear a man from inside a tent say, "I wouldn't order the Eggs Benedict. I've heard bad things all morning about it." In reality, it's heartbreaking. It's frustrating, and the city keeps trying solutions that work about as well as duct tape on a flat tire with a quarter size hole in it. And while you're navigating that, you'll be navigating traffic that makes absolutely no sense. Portland isn't even that big of a city, yet somehow the roads are clogged like a teenager's pores. Every rainy day, and spoiler alert, they're all rainy days, someone forgets hydroplaning is a thing and spins out of control on the I-5. You'll spend more time sitting in traffic listening to NPR explain why you're broke than you will actually getting to where you're going to make some money so you don't continue to be broke. Of course, once summer hits, you might think things are going to get better. Ha! That's when Oregon decides to set itself on fire. Wildfires have become the state's new summer tradition. We have them every single year. I will tell you this, though. This year, 2025, has not been that bad. I mean, been here 16, 17 years, and I've seen way worse. This one's not that bad. But you either get a weekend of crisp mountain air or 2 weeks of smoke so thick you'll be Googling, can I use an N95 mask for wildfire smoke and COVID at the same time? It's like living inside a campfire without marshmallows. And as if that wasn't enough, Oregon sits on top of a giant geological middle finger called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. Scientists have been warning for years about the big one, a mega earthquake that could flatten everything west of I-5. Oregonians shrug and keep drinking their IPAs, but deep down they know they're living in an earthquake waiting room. Now, you'll hear about that a lot when you move up here. Someone's always got to bring it up. Like, Portland's not even going to be here in 20 years once that big earthquake happens. Da, 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 da. You know, and some people think that might be the best thing for Portland, but I don't know. I grew up in Southern California, and I'd been hearing about the big one that was going to separate California from the rest of the continent ever since I was like 6 years old. You know, it never happens. I'm not saying it won't. I mean, scientists aren't just making this up for shits and giggles, right? It's going to happen, but it might be 500, 1,000, 20,000 years from now. It's there. People will talk about it. It's almost like sometimes people just want to talk about Bigfoot. Okay, let's say you move to Oregon and decide Portland isn't your scene. Maybe you want to try small town Oregon. Well, good luck finding a job that doesn't involve logging, Walmart, or asking people if they like to have fries with that. The job market outside the big cities is weaker than decaffeinated coffee. You'll meet people in rural Oregon who are still clinging on to jobs that dried up 30 years ago and ranting and raving about joining Idaho to make themselves feel better. It's like time traveling, except instead of ending up in the 1950s with cool cars and jukeboxes, you end up in 1987 with unemployment and a shuttered mill. Politically, the state is two angry roommates sharing a studio apartment. Western Oregon is liberal, progressive, and proud of it. Eastern Oregon is cowboy hats, pickup trucks, and succession petitions. The eastern side of Oregon hates the western part of Oregon, and the western part of Oregon never thinks about the eastern part of Oregon, unless they're driving through it on the way someplace else. Every election season feels like a bad divorce where both sides are arguing over who gets custody of the tax revenue. The only thing keeping Oregon from splitting in half is the fact that nobody wants Eastern Oregon. Idaho doesn't want them. They've kind of humored them and said, we'll talk about it. But I'm sure once they see the price tag that goes along with taking half of a state and the taxpayers got to pay Oregon back for all that, things that belong to Oregon, like small airports, government buildings, schools, roads, they got to pay for all that stuff to Oregon. And the Idaho taxpayers aren't going to want to cover that bill. Let's talk about Portland again. The city used to be weird. Now it's a parody of itself. The breweries, the overpriced apartment, the endless wave of out-of-towners who show up with a trust fund and a Keep Portland Weird bumper sticker. The actual weirdness got replaced by corporate-approved weirdness about 10 years ago. Even the gas stations are weird because in many counties, you're not allowed to pump your own gas. It's supposed to be this quirky law, but in reality, it's just you sitting in your car watching some poor teenager wrestle with the gas nozzle while you sit in that car and pretend you're wealthy and he is your gas butler. And don't forget about Portland's national reputation. The rest of the country thinks Portland is basically a Mad Max movie with coffee. Even if things calm down, that image isn't going away anytime soon. Tell someone you live in Portland and they'll ask you if you've ever been tear gassed. And I get that because if you watch the news, They make it look like Portland is on fire. Now, I'm not saying we don't have our problems. We do. We have far too many homeless. There is a lot more crime than there was here 10 years ago. We do have protests, but they're not engulfing the street in rage, fire, and flipped over cars. The worst we had was what, 3 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever that was, 4 years. God, when was that? 5 years ago? God, I guess 2020. Yeah. So 2020, we had major riots and protests. I went down there. There were two different things going on. I've talked about this in other videos. Around 6 o'clock at night, out in front of one federal building, I think it was a federal building, there was protests, people making speeches, people chanting, and then they'd go home. And about the time they went home, let's say around 7, 8 o'clock, maybe 9 o'clock, you see this other group of people filing in front of the federal building and the park in front of it. And they would, just protest and throw things and get shot with rubber bullets, get tear gas. And there was thousands and thousands of people. I went down there for that. But you get home and the news makes it sound like the entire city was engulfed in flames and buildings were falling down and, dogs and cats sleeping together, Armageddon. But no, you had a 4, 5, 6 block radius, maybe 6 square blocks at max of nonsense going on and protests and riots and all that. The rest of the city was perfectly fine. But what people saw was the riots, and they assumed, and the press, the news coverage, made it sound like the entire city was engulfed. It wasn't. It was just this area, which sucked. I'm not saying that was okay. Definitely wasn't. Went on way too long. They broke stuff, which protest, like those other people did, perfectly fine. Freak out and start throwing stuff at federal agents and trying to burn down buildings, that's wrong. But it was still in a small area. It was weird. Now, let's say you've had enough nonsense and you're thinking about heading to the coast for relief. Don't pack a swimsuit. Oregon beaches aren't about sunbathing and margaritas. They're about wind so strong it exfoliates you free, and the water is so cold it makes penguins shiver. You'll dip your toes in the Pacific once, scream like you stepped on a Lego, and never go back again. You'll go back to the beach, you just won't get in the water. That's what my kids did. I brought them to Oregon after spending their lives 2 blocks from the beach in Southern California. They looked at the water at Cannon Beach, and I could hear the excitement actually leave their bodies. It was almost audible. So they messed around in the water for about 10 minutes. That was it. These are kids that used to go into the water for hours at a time in Redondo Beach, California. They were so depressed. I think they've been back a handful of times since then. And they don't even go to the water. They just walk around the beach. Now, before we end this, I want to be clear. Oregon has a bunch of problems, but I still think it's the best state there is. Portland is its biggest problem, but in honesty, it's gotten so much better over the last 3 years. Now, it still has a long ways to go, a very long ways to go. If you want to see how it's doing now, we can compare what they're telling you on the news. List a bunch of places in the comment section below that you would like me to go film. And next week, I'll go down there and I'll film those locations, as many as I can get to, and we'll make a video out of it. So I could show you that the city does have problems, but it's not engulfed in flames, and they're not riots everywhere every single day. All right, so in conclusion, move to Oregon if you like high prices, endless rain, and the constant sense that nature, politics, and your landlord are all conspiring against you. But hey, at least the trees are pretty, right? When you can see them through the fog, smoke, and depression. See you in the next video.